Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of The Sapient. Today we have a very special guest. Her name is Natalie. Hi Natalie, welcome to the episode.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Could you please introduce yourself?
Sure, so as you said, my name is Natalie. I'm 24 and I'm a novelist from Hampshire in England. And another thing that you might want to know about me for the podcast is that I have cerebral palsy and use a wheelchair full time.
So, yeah. So, but also you write books, right?
I do, yeah. That's my job. I'm a novelist, yeah.
So, how many books have you written till date?
Well, the number of published books I have out is 2 at the moment. But I'm almost done with the third one in that series of books, which is going to comprise of 4 titles. So hopefully by the end of this year, I'll have my third one out.
And what genre do you like to write on?
Well, these ones I've got out at the moment are thrillers, and they're set in a kind of dystopian sort of alternate future. Although saying that, I love writing stories for younger audiences as well. So one day I'd like to sort of explore that a bit more. I have too many ideas rattling around in my brain just for the one series. So.
Got it. So, I was really interested, in understanding what was the like writing process for you. Like, so you just imagine and write, or you just sit down to write, and you come up with concepts and story plots.
Yeah, that's a really good question, because my process has changed quite a lot from the beginning of the series to now. Because when I started writing this series, it was a very long time ago, and I was 12. So my process then was hide the notebooks under my desk at school and hope no one notices. Especially in the lessons that I was less apt at. So maths was a key lesson that got sacrificed often to my attempts to finish my first novel. The years passed, and I've refined my writing process somewhat now. I have my own space to write, and I can choose where to write based on sort of various things. Weather is a key one. If it's sunny, I like to write outside. And that's a luxury I'm still not used to, even though I left school quite a few years ago now. But I still remember what it was like to have to hide my notebooks under the desk at school. So every day I don't have to do that is a good day, writing wise.
So, mathematics was your sacrificial lamb, right?
Yes, yeah. I mean, I did pass, but only just. Yeah, I have nothing but respect for those who are brilliant at maths. I am not one of those people. I have one very specific skill set, and that's telling stories and writing stories. So yeah, unfortunately, apologies to any of my ex-maths teachers if they're listening, but yeah.
Yeah. So yeah. Like, your writing style must be like quite unique to you, of course. But who is that writer, whom you take that kind of inspiration and lean on when you have to produce a quality content?
That's another really great question. It's a tricky one to answer because I have so many writers who I really admire and look up to, and the reasons that I look up to them are always different. So my one of my absolute favourite ever writers is the British author Neil Gaiman,
Mm-hmm.
and what I like about his work is that his imagination really knows no bounds. So just when you think you can't be surprised by him anymore,
Mm-hmm.
he does something else, and he writes across genres, which is a really difficult thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
But he makes it look easy, which is something I'm always kind of admired about him. Another of my favourite writers is the British author Cressida Cowell, who writes mostly fantasy books, and the series that she first became known for was the How to Train Your Dragon series, which later became the DreamWorks film.
Mm-hmm.
And what I love about her style of writing is, even though she makes it very accessible for all audiences to read, from young children up to their grandparents, you can tell that she's done lots and lots of research, and you can tell that she thinks about every single word,
Mm-hmm.
and that every single word belongs in that story, and she knows exactly what she's doing, but without ever feeling like she's sacrificed the story into "look how clever I am," which some writers do. They have a tendency to want to show off about how much research they've done. But with Cressida Cowell's work, the story is always the thing that you focus on the most. But it's made so much more complex and beautiful by all her research. So yeah, but there's I could answer this one question for the next hour and a half, because there's so many wonderful writers in the world,
Uh-huh.
and they all have a different magic powers. So
Mm-hmm. So, and also, can I ask you when, what time do you feel is, very good for your creativeness, in the, either in the early mornings or in the late nights, which is the sort of period, when if you sit down in that period, anything that flows from your pen is an absolute, like gold mine.
I wish I had a period that was that consistent that I knew would be great.
Uh-huh.
The time I like to write the most is probably sort of early evening time. I don't know what it is about that. Just I think because things have quietened down sort of around me a bit, so I kind of, and also I've got the whole day's kind of worth of thinking that I've been doing.
Mm-hmm.
So oftentimes in the evening time, I kind of do sometimes get the sort of the slightly intangible and kind of mystic
Mm-hmm.
sensation where I'm like, oh, this is feeling easier. But often I have days where I think, oh, this is going to be really easy,
Mm-hmm.
and then it turns out to be very very hard, and I feel like I'm sort of crowbarring words out of my brain.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have days when I start thinking, oh, this is going to be a really difficult day, and it actually flows a lot easier than that. So yeah, it's a bit of a roulette game, really. But yeah, I think probably sort of the early to mid evening times when I'm sort of in the zone most often, I would think.
Mm-hmm. So, like, do you find yourself often, suffering from, like writing paralysis, or, just drawing out of content?
Not often, thankfully. I have had periods. I had a period a couple of years ago where I was very, very ill,
Mm-hmm.
and because of how ill I was mentally, I struggled, and I had what I would call writer's block.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't. I know that that's a controversial term among writers, but that's what I've always called it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, don't kill me, fellow writers who don't believe in writer's block. Um, but I have a couple of periods like that, but most of the time, even if I'm finding the writing very difficult, I still can write it, even if it's something that I don't think is good enough for the final product, so I won't keep.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but the big the big thing about writing is that as long as you keep putting one word in front of another, you will eventually finish. And then once you've done that bit, you can do the editing and the polishing and the fine tuning and the moving things around and the redrafting and all the other work that
Mm-hmm.
goes into it. But that's often what I tell myself when I'm really struggling. I just say to myself, one word in front of the other, and then that word becomes a sentence, and that sentence becomes a paragraph, and those paragraphs become chapters, and those chapters become books.
Mm-hmm.
You just got to keep on plugging at it, really.
Yeah. And also, what I feel is, there are periods, let's say, patches in, a writer's journey where, sometimes, it seems like, whatever content, or, whatever they're writing, it's just absolute garbage, and, they don't want to publish out there. Has that ever happened to you?
Yes. Um, Certainly it has. In the drafting phase,
Mm-hmm.
um, I never, I'm never happy with the first draft of anything I do. I
Mm-hmm.
always the first draft is the bit where I sort of have the raw ideas, and it's kind of a big chaotic mess.
Mm-hmm.
And the sort of the real work bit of the job comes after that, where the book that I've just brought out, so my latest release, Family
Yeah,
Ties,
family ties.
I redra- I redrafted 6 times before I
Okay.
was happy with it.
Mm-hmm.
And even then, you know that you could spend the rest of your life
Mm-hmm.
rereading, and you would always find things that you could do better or different.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think my ultimate aim is to do the best job that I can when I make things, and I don't put them out until I'm reasonably confident I've done the best job that I can.
Mm-hmm.
But saying that, I do often beat myself up, like, I could have done that so much better,
Mm-hmm.
or I shouldn't have put that bit there, I should have put it somewhere else
Uh-huh.
instead, or things like that. But broadly, I don't give up until I'm at least mostly happy with what I've done.
Mm-hmm. So, like, once you have sort of, published the book and it's out there, sometimes do you feel, like, okay, this, sort of thing could be added, or, this could be, subtracted from the content?
Once I publish a work, I don't go back and change it.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of, I move on to the next one, and I'm kind of, that takes up my focus.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, I, especially because I've lived with this series for so long.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes when I do readings and I read back to my own books,
Mm-hmm.
um, sometimes I will think to myself, "Oh, um, that's an interesting choice, but I could have done it different ways."
Mm-hmm.
But I think that to myself. But I think, I've been very fortunate that most of the people that read my stories seem to like them very much. So, I don't think I do too badly at it the first time around.
Mm-hmm.
But I am a perfectionist, but there comes a point where you could redraft and edit forever,
Mm-hmm.
and there comes a point where you kind of have to let it go and let it out in the world, and let people and readers in particular make
Mm-hmm.
what they will of it, and that's kind of out of your hands, really.
Okay. And, so the recent book, of yours, how do you think it was received by, those people who had read the first book? Like, did they see an arc of, like, development, and, better story plots?
Well, I don't often check my own reviews because, um, as I say, I move once I've published one work. I'm sort of knee deep in the next. But the reviews I have had for Family Ties have been very, very pleasing to read, and there's a real sense of satisfaction for me when I read a review and I think, um, this reviewer's interpretation of my work is, it kind of shows to me that I have done what I set out to do. I mean, readers will always have their own interpretations of things, and that's wonderful. But if the core of what I was trying to do is reflected in a review,
Mm-hmm.
then I feel as if I've done my bit of the job well enough. I've held up my side of the bargain, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. So, do you think that cerebral palsy itself has ever like come in the way of you and your creative work, and has it impacted the way you work on a regular basis?
That's another really great question. I think the way in which physically it impacts me the most is partly due to my own stubbornness, and partly just because of how um, it's how I feel I work best. When I'm drafting a new work, I will always write it out longhand, by hand in notebooks.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and part of my cerebral palsy is it makes my fine motor skills,
Mm-hmm.
like handwriting, difficult, and I have to concentrate quite hard, and it can get quite painful. So I don't quite know why I do that to myself every time. But it's how I've always worked, and it just seems to work reasonably well from that point of view.
Mm-hmm.
The interesting part of it, I think, is even though my books are novels and their first purpose is to entertain, and they're not autobiographical, and the characters in the book are not just pale representations of me, they are
Mm-hmm.
their own people, so to speak. I do think a lot of the themes um, crystallized for me
Mm-hmm.
because of things that had happened to me because of my disability.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the big themes in the entire series
Mm-hmm.
is prejudice, because it's set around the interactions of two groups of people,
Mm-hmm.
um, both of whom hate the other one, just on principle,
Mm-hmm.
based on where they live, basically, and based on what their assumptions are
Mm-hmm.
about those people because of where they live.
Mm-hmm.
And I definitely know what that feels like, to be at the sharp end of people's prejudice. I mean, prejudice is, um, as old as the hills.
Mm-hmm.
There's been so throughout the whole history of time, a group of people have said, "I don't like you because you're not like me."
Mm-hmm.
Um, but to be at the sharp end of that, especially during my childhood, when I was at primary school,
Mm-hmm.
I found that really difficult, and I never sort of felt as if I was kind of accepted, not until I went to secondary school, which happened much later.
Mm-hmm.
And I think those kind of things are reflected in the book, because it's that kind of judgmental nature and the reductive nature of thinking like that. So um, you are an outsider, therefore you have no value to me,
Mm-hmm.
and there's nothing that you can teach me, etc. That kind of reductionist view of people
Mm-hmm.
is what causes a lot of the damage
Mm-hmm.
in my books. So I think a lot of it is kind of influenced by the life experiences I've had, and I don't think I would have those experiences were it not for my disability as such. So
Mm-hmm.
mhm.
So, it seems like you have gone through, let's say, a period of evolution where you had to certainly adopt to many things. But it almost also at the same time feels like you believe in no pain no gain kind of thing, where you're constantly punishing yourself in order to come up with good content.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not advocating that anybody else should deliberately do things to make their life more difficult,
Mm-hmm.
but without reaching for the tiny violins of self-pity and wallowing for a bit, um, because of the profundity of my physical disability. So I use a wheelchair full time to get
Mm-hmm.
about. You know, can't walk at all really, and because of those things, absolutely everything I do is more difficult than it otherwise would have been.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I kind of grew up with that as my framework.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, things are going to be hard, but I'm going to carry on doing them anyway because I like doing them. And the only thing I don't find difficult
Mm-hmm.
is telling stories. That I can do very easily.
Mm-hmm.
So that was what kind of drew me, I think, to writing in the first place. But yeah, I care very much about my work, and I care very much about the readers of my work. So there isn't really an end to which I won't go in order to get the story that I want.
Mm-hmm.
And fortunately for me, it hasn't landed me in too much hot water just yet.
Just yet, yeah.
But there's still time.
Yes. Surely. Yeah, so stepping a little bit away, um from the topic of novels and writing, I do have a pretty, let's say, wild questions for you here. So one of the questions is, many people, like, say that, British food is one of the most boring food, like, out there. So what's your opinion on it?
Yes. Well, I'm afraid, my fellow countrymen and women, I would have to agree.
Mm-hmm.
I think, we have certain things that we have in Britain that I do love. Like we
Uh-huh.
have what we call the full English breakfast,
Uh-huh.
which involves sausages, eggs, bacon,
Mm-hmm.
and lots of other ways in which to tempt fate with heart disease.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that is our kind of culinary pinnacle, which when you look around the rest of the world,
Mm-hmm.
I don't travel as much as I would like,
Uh-huh.
but I've had Thai food and French food, Indian
Mm-hmm.
and Chinese, and I look at all those cuisines and I think, oh my god, there's so many flavors and colors and
Mm-hmm.
textures and things like that, and a lot of English food is beige.
Yes.
Huge amounts of it is beige. So it's like, I have to say, even though I should be defending my country to the hilt,
Uh-huh.
I do think that in terms of food,
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, I think pretty much the rest of the world has an edge over us in terms of food, I think. But we have our full English breakfast, so we're happy because we in England we have a very peculiar fondness for things that I'm sure seem very strange if you if you don't live in England.
Yeah.
My big culinary sin where I live is that I do not like tea,
Okay.
which, even though is not British in origin, we
Mm-hmm.
consider it like a staple of British culture
Uh-huh.
to the extent where we laughably call it English breakfast tea,
Yes.
even though it isn't English at
Yeah.
all. Uh, um, but but I cannot stand tea,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and that is another thing that makes me a pariah
Mm-hmm.
to a lot of people in England because I don't drink tea, which is basically the equivalent of telling an English person that you don't breathe air. It's it's
Yes.
kind of very frowned upon in England.
Yes.
But yeah, I guess
I do
it's
find it,
another thing that makes me stand
pretty
out.
ironic, when English people, especially, call tea as their own. I'm like, yeah, that's pretty ironic, because you just took something that was not
Yes,
yours and you just called it, that's, it's mine.
yes, exactly. We are unfortunately in. history and indeed sort of still now, we are rather prone to that, taking stuff that's not
Mm-hmm.
ours and claiming it as our own. That seems to be our national raison d'etre.
Oh yeah, yeah.
At times, I'm gonna get in big trouble in my own country now. But nonetheless, I once heard someone refer to England, especially in times gone by,
Mm-hmm.
as the toddlers of the world, in that they go around going, "This is mine,"
Oh yeah.
whenever they find stuff they want and just snatch it.
Yes, I mean this
But
coming from an Indian, I can definitely attest to that. I can say yeah, I
yes, I
understand
mean
that.
tea. I mean tea. Our so-called cultural icon is, of course, Indian. It's not
Yes.
British. So I'm kind of like, you know, but I feel like our fondness and sort of fake ownership of tea
Uh-huh.
is kind of symptomatic of our kind of national foibles, in that we think we're much more important than we are.
Mm-hmm.
We think we're much more, we think we basically think we own everything, which
Yep.
of course we don't. And yeah, it's especially in the last few years. Well, I mean, especially with colonial past and everything, but in the last few years of
Mm-hmm.
my lifetime is when I've really found it quite difficult to be English, because I'm like, oh my god, what must we look like on the world stage?
Yeah.
And it's kind of, as you say, we have a strange, very strange culture in England where we're like, we're great, but also we will take absolutely everything that we like,
Oh yeah.
and never mind about the people that actually did the work to put it there in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm going to get excommunicated now. The government are going to come and deport me.
Yeah, I think
But
that's a big issue in like your country right now, is it? That like people can't post really offensive or thought provoking social media posts because they're getting arrested, and they're landing in themselves into trouble recently.
yeah, I mean, in England, we don't, when I say the government is going to come and arrest me, I am joking. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think that's actually going to happen. But there certainly is a percentage of people in England who absolutely believe that England can do no wrong
Mm-hmm.
and everybody else in the world is inferior to us. And one of them was Prime Minister until very recently. So it's hi Boris, by the
Yeah.
way. If you're listening, I am talking about you.
Uh-huh.
Deal with it. Uh, but you know, there is a huge. Well, I don't know actually if it is huge or if it's sort of a vocal minority, but there is a significant portion of English society who, if anybody says, maybe we're not, this invincible juggernaut of awesomeness that everyone seems to think,
Mm-hmm.
or indeed if anyone quietly points out the origin of so-called English breakfast tea, they
Like you, is it?
they may get yeah they might get descended on by a
Uh-huh.
mob of flag waving alt-right lunatics. But I'm hoping that eventually the pendulum will have to swing the other way, because I think it's getting to the point now where I don't. But every time I say this, things get worse, so I'm going to regret this. But it's getting to the point now where I think we can't really look much more ridiculous
Mm-hmm.
to the rest of the planet.
Yeah.
So eventually, by sheer force of probability, things have to improve
Uh-huh.
somewhere, surely.
Yeah, because
But
I
yeah,
recently, saw that in London, I think, few young boys were, arrested because they said something about the woke culture, and like, let's say they said something that was thought provoking, and it was not entirely illegal, but they essentially touched few nerves that they were not supposed to touch, therefore they were
yes,
arrested. So I thought, damn,
yeah,
the country in which even till today, I think I've seen in many many debates, against colonialism, and all the stuff that, when the same country, has taught us that, like, we gave you democracy, and in the same country, we see that democracy is, slowly getting choked.
Yeah, I think that's very astute, and I think um, I really think that in order for things to get better, there has to be a sea change at the top levels of government, because the government that we have now
Hmm.
is so corrupt that they don't know how else to operate.
Yes.
They just go around um like you say, arresting people for waving bits of paper or whatever,
Yeah.
and you know it's and meanwhile, of course, um for instance, during
Hmm.
lockdowns, people in top of my government were, partying and trying to pass that off as a work
Hmm.
commitment,
Okay.
while people were having to say goodbye to their loved ones.
Uh-huh.
Like, I mean, the whole thing is. I mean, I imagine that if I didn't live here, it
Hmm.
would be quite funny.
Yeah, I mean, I
But
am really trying to contain myself, because,
I mean,
if partying was considered
yeah.
as working, gladly sign me up.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like, and all the nurses and all the doctors that were actually, and the scientists and so forth, and the
Uh-huh.
virologists, none of them were, as far as I know, having Christmas parties. But
Yeah, I mean, they
yeah,
could they
that's
could hardly see their own families.
exactly. And there's a prime minister in my series of novels, just to
Mhm.
tie it back in with that slightly. And when I created him, I
Mhm.
took out a lot of his scenes because I was like, no, no one could be prime minister and be this incompetent or this sort of selfish or whatever. And now I fully resent every single one of those sentences that I took out, because obviously I haven't made him stupid enough. Um, so I do think to myself, um, all those times I spent agonizing over stuff you were saying, thinking like, no, you must have to have some kind of um degree of sensibleness
Mhm.
in order to have this job. Turns
Uh-huh.
out that young me was a bit overly optimistic.
So yeah,
Now, jaded, bitter, not so young me is resenting the fact that I now look ridiculous because my prime minister is in the book is vaguely competent,
mhm.
which is obviously not the done thing around here. But
Mhm. So here is my suggestion then. In that case, I think you should write one more book called as Inside Out Prime Minister Edition.
oh yeah, oh that would be so
Oh
good.
yeah, just
Just
to, like, just to say suck it. That will be the biggest
just
suck it statement.
just document his many failures. I mean, in tribute and homage to my current government, I have in the later books.
Mhm.
So, for instance, the one I'm writing at the moment, in heartfelt homage to my current government, I have
Mhm.
stopped saying to myself, "Oh no, you couldn't be this stupid and be prime minister at the same time."
Mhm.
I've I've given up censoring that, so I now just like, would you do that thing that's obviously gonna go wrong and has no plausible benefit? Yes.
Yeah,
I just like
most
shove it
probably
in and
yes.
just
Yeah.
yeah. I'm like, and if anything, like he's not burning enough houses down or
Uh-huh.
whatever it is that he does.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
I mean,
yeah,
if you just jotted down all of the, like, the most stupidest, let's say, idea that you got in terms of what a prime minister can do, in the coming, let's say, 5 to 10 years, people might call you as a, like a time traveler, because most of them would
yeah,
be probably right.
yeah. I mean, you have to laugh, really, but I can only imagine what
Hmm.
a bunch of absolute wallies we must look to anyone else anyone who isn't English.
Yes.
And I very much, you know, I'm like, this was clearly such a bad idea.
Mm-hmm.
But at the time that all this stuff was going on, I was, you know, writing these books and still thinking to myself, no, I don't think I can get away with making them quite this dim. But that was a mistake on my part. That I will seek to rectify in
Mm-hmm.
future
Let's call
works.
it
Yeah.
oversight instead of a mistake. Let's call it oversight, and uh, you know,
Yes.
yeah, um, yeah.
Yeah, but I
Coming.
love that the thought of that Prime
Uh
Minister
huh.
edition is like, I'm definitely gonna do that now. That's
Yeah.
gonna be a
Please
thing.
give up. Like a small thought about it. With
Oh,
the
I
current
will.
situation that it's going throughout the world. Yeah, and also just to upset you, India is the fifth largest economy. It overtook Britain very recently.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, just to put
Yeah.
it on your face.
Yeah, I mean, fair play to you guys. I mean, you obviously deserve it more than we do because, well, I say we, I don't mean the people of Britain, I mean the people who are in power.
Uh-huh.
But I'm kind of just like, I was talking to a friend the other day who is originally from Africa,
Mm-hmm.
and she was explaining to me about this stand-up comedy
Mm-hmm.
that she'd seen from her own country,
Mm-hmm.
and she was like, but he was saying that your people, your prime minister and so on, partied during lockdown and things like that, and that's ridiculous. That didn't really happen, did it? And I had the sort of dreadfully shameful moment of being like, that's not a joke. That's a real thing that actually happened. And
Damn.
it's like the tip of a very big iceberg. But, fair play to you guys. And pray for those of us that still live in England,
Yeah.
but also are not quite as convinced that the current government are doing a bang up job as they seem to be.
Uh-huh.
But,
So, like, what do you think about the cost of living kind of crisis within London and all this really developed
oh, I mean,
cities?
yeah, I mean, it really, I'm very lucky in
Mm-hmm.
that sense. Like, I'm not nearly as poorly off as some people, but
Mm-hmm.
I kind of make a point of, when I'm on socials or listen to the radio, I kind of make a point of collecting stories
Mm-hmm.
of people who are worse hit by it than me,
Mm-hmm.
because I mean, it's an absolute shame. It's a shame that the government should be carrying but aren't,
Mm-hmm.
because they're like, oh, us and all our mates are fine.
Yeah.
Therefore, it's acceptable for an elderly lady to have to ride around on the bus all day
Mm-hmm.
for warmth because she can't heat her home in
Yeah.
winter. This was,
Uh-huh.
or it's acceptable for a house in which the main breadwinner is a teacher
Mm-hmm.
to have outdoor and indoor coats
Mm-hmm.
because they can't afford to heat, or it's acceptable to have more food banks than ever,
Yeah.
with more opening all the time. And those things are not acceptable. And I sort of I read those stories because I need to remind myself
Mm-hmm.
how not acceptable it is.
Yeah.
Because I think there's a danger when you live in a place where lots of the media and lots of the government are trying to make that sound normal and acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
You sort of have to work
Yeah.
to kind of keep reminding yourself it's not normal, it's not acceptable, and it should not be like
Yeah.
this. But yeah, I mean, it genuinely is heartbreaking
Do you
and
think that the situation in Ukraine acted as kind of like divergence in terms of like the issues that people are facing?
yes, I mean the situation in Ukraine is another um set of appalling injustices that
Mm-hmm.
break my heart. Um, but I think, as you say, like, I think, especially my own current government, they like to use Ukraine quite a lot as a sort of a crutch
Mm-hmm.
to be like, oh, we're being really super helpful in Ukraine,
Mm-hmm.
even though we're not being anywhere near as helpful as we could be being. But let's gloss over that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but so they're like, yeah, it's all about Ukraine for us. It's all about helping Ukraine,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously we should be helping Ukraine. We absolutely should. But I do think there is a slight sense of, I don't want to say sort of relief, because obviously I don't know these people, but
Mm-hmm.
I get the sense that a lot of people in government were probably a little bit pleased
Mm-hmm.
that those awful events happened, because it gave them something else to point at and go,
Yes.
look over there, don't look
Yeah.
over here. Which, I mean, I think that the situation in Ukraine is absolutely dire, and I think they're sort of facing up to this onslaught with kind of heroism and um, bravery, and it's another thing that's deeply unfair and deeply unjust.
Mm-hmm.
But I am in that place right now again where I'm like, I have to remind myself how bad everything is,
Mm-hmm.
like Ukraine, and also the situation more domestically as well, because you know I don't know. It's, as I say, like, when I wrote this book, I was like, what's the worst kind of environment I can think of?
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, okay, I'm going to have an incompetent prime minister.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to have huge sections of the population
Mm-hmm.
not being able to afford to eat.
Okay.
Um, I'm going to have massive acts of repeated violence.
Mm-hmm.
And I put all these things in because I was like, I want to make the worst backdrop I can,
Mm-hmm.
and it has given me no pleasure to be right. You know, it it's getting to the point now where almost I'm not even sure I can categorize my book as dystopia anymore,
Mm-hmm.
because it's like, everything almost that I put in the book when I was 12,
Mm-hmm.
thinking, how bad could things get?
Mm-hmm.
Almost all of it has happened in some way, shape, or form, and
Mm-hmm.
that's sort of terrifying. But I think we have to sort of work in whatever small way we can. We have to sort of work to try and undo that,
Yeah.
because if we don't, I really like fear for what happens to the world.
Mm-hmm.
Um, right from the war in Ukraine, right down to those elderly people who are getting sick because they can't afford to heat their houses.
Mm-hmm.
And I think at some point there has to be some kind of sea change. Um, and I sort of live in hope that eventually it has to happen, because it cannot go on like this. It's not sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I have to hope that I can, in a few years, I can look back and think, oh, I can categorize the books as dystopian again now.
Yeah.
That would be really nice, because at the moment I'm like, oh my god, like, this is so awful that it now is. Like, someone sent me a thing the other day
Mm-hmm.
about, I think it was about warm banks, which is public buildings that are heating themselves because people can't afford to heat their own houses.
Uh-huh.
And I had a very similar concept that I wrote about in Inside Out when I was 13.
Mm-hmm.
And then a friend of mine sent me this link, and I was like, oh god, like, that wasn't supposed to really happen. That was supposed to be an exaggeration. That wasn't supposed to be a real thing, guys.
Yeah.
Like, we need to, like, solve it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess in a way,
Uh-huh.
my way of sort of dealing with it is writing about it. but I wish
So
I'd been
yeah, I have to
wide
ask
of the
you,
mark.
from the general public, are you a time traveler?
Um, it's a great question. I couldn't possibly answer it without compromising my serious secret plans.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say that I am a big fan of Doctor Who,
Uh-huh.
which is a British TV show about a time traveling alien
Uh-huh.
who goes around trying to improve the human race.
Yeah.
But beyond that, I could not possibly comment.
Okay. So you can neither accept it or deny it, is it?
I cannot,
Mm-hmm.
indeed.
So
Um,
yeah, that
but
that is still in the air, unclear.
I invite you, glorious listeners, and Ganesh, to
Mm-hmm.
draw your own conclusions based on what I have just said
Mm-hmm.
as to the nature of my time traveling exploits.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, now we are really starting to get suspicious about your
Yeah, I maybe
activities.
need to work. I need to work maybe on my cover story. I'm not sure.
Yeah, maybe.
Doing a doing a podcast is probably not a great way to do that, but hell.
It's one of the most probably the worst ways.
Yeah, I'm taking hiding in plain sight to a whole new level now.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah,
Oh,
I mean, it was really nice talking to you. I mean, because it was important and serious, yet balanced out with your sense of humor.
thank you.
Yeah.
You
Uh,
have to laugh or you're
uh-huh.
going to cry, I think. I think you and I feel the same way
Yeah.
about that.
Yes. um and also, thank you for being honest about your own country and your countrymen, who might come after you with torches during the night. So all the best for
Yeah,
that.
with their Union Jacks as their
Uh-huh.
primary weapon.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no, I made of tough stuff. I can cope with it.
Uh-huh. So yeah, once more, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to just talk to you. um and
Thank you
also,
so much for having me.
uh-huh.
I've loved it. It's been my absolute, I'm going to say my pleasure,
Mm-hmm.
but also my rage. Because I've definitely got angry
Uh-huh.
while I've been talking to you, but it's been very cathartic. So I thank you for that
Uh-huh.
sincerely.
Yeah, thank you very much too. And also, if people want to, buy your book, where could they buy it?
Sure. So, Inside Out is available from many, many online retailers,
Mm-hmm.
including Amazon,
Okay.
and other platforms across the world. It's
Uh-huh.
also available if you prefer a bricks and mortar bookshop. If you go in
Mm-hmm.
and request a copy of Inside Out by Natalie Hibberd, then that should be easy to be obtained for you.
Mm-hmm.
And I would be genuinely delighted
Mm-hmm.
if any of your wonderful, wonderful listeners would care to join my perfectly formed gang of readers, because
Uh-huh.
it's for you guys I do this job, really. So.
Hopefully, yeah. I mean, not hopefully. I think you will get some good readers, because of the way you have, let's say, you're leaving us with some mystery in terms of time travel, and because I made sure
Yeah.
not to bring the plots of your books to the podcast, because I want people to go out and read and actually invest time in terms of to understand the hard work and the kind of talent that you got.
Oh, thank you very much. You've been an absolute superstar at avoiding the plot spoilers, but everyone can play a terrible Prime Minister bingo when they
Uh-huh.
pick the book up.
Yeah.
And just know that in the first drafts, it was much, much worse / closer to real life.
Hmm. Yeah. And also, yeah, there are there are many things in between those lines that you just said. Yeah.
Yes, yes, indeed.
And
Yeah.
if you could just let us know what where people can reach you if they want to reach you out.
Sure. So, I'm probably most easily contactable through my website, which is nataliehibberdauthor.co.uk.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also on Instagram at Natalie Hibberd Author and Twitter
Mm-hmm.
at Natalie Hibberd and Facebook at Natalie Hibberd as well. So if any of you guys want to reach out and chat or learn more about the books or hear more of my angry rantings,
Mm-hmm.
you can find me in any of those places.
Sure, I will also drop your preferred social media link in the episode bio, so that people can contact you if and when they want to just talk to you. It was very, let's say, it was my pleasure having you on the episode today. And obviously, frankly, I did not expect this conversation of ours to be as interesting and as funny as it was. So yeah, thank you very much for helping me with spending one more hour of my life. It's 50. It's been it's a pretty long episode that we have had here. So yeah, thank you very much once again.
Thank you so much. I have loved every second of this. It's been fabulous.
Well, you are welcome. You are very welcome. So, guys, this is the end of the episode. Please go, just go on Google and just search for Natalie, and just go to her website. So that we can just rank her up in the Google search. You know, so that she can fight against big multinational corporation authors. She is an author. Whom we genuinely have to support. Authors like her in order to let's say get many more great books and novels and let's say future series that has to be written. So yeah, and also I have pasted her social media link in the episode bio. So if you got time, just check it out and just send her a message, so that she also feels encouraged in doing her work. So thank you very much. Tata.